Hello, welcome to the second chapter, Mobile User Interface. Today we'll actually start to work on some practical hands-on where we'll actually start to develop some simple mobile applications. From the previous chapter, you should have learned that we can actually develop on different platforms for mobile applications, and we have to pick a certain platform that we want to develop on. Here we'll try to show you examples using Android. And in Android, you can actually try to use different IDEs to actually develop your applications. Of course, one of the popular choice is to use the default IDE, the Android Studio. But here we'll try to show you examples of other IDEs as well. You can also make use of other Java IDEs to actually try to produce Android applications. And in this course, we'll try to show you Eclipse. Primarily, we are trying to use Eclipse because of the speed that we can actually show you the emulators and etc. If you're using Android Studio and other newer IDEs, you could actually face difficulty running your emulators in a reasonable speed, as it is quite resource taking and it will actually be quite slow. So most of the time we'll highly encourage you to actually have an actual Android device while developing Android applications for faster testing, and it's easier for you to directly see the results and also to test on all sorts of the performances and UI as well as multi-touch and etc. that cannot be easily tested using an emulator. So let's get started by looking at our IDE over here. So of course, each of your IDE could have a very different interface depending on what you're using. You can try to start to create a new project. So here I will look for an Android project, an Android application project over here, and I will actually give it a name. So let's call it Practical 1. The package name is compulsory in Android projects. So you have to give it a package name, and the package name must actually have more than one identifier. So I gave a package name with 4 identifiers over here. You can select the minimum required SDKs, target SDKs, compile, and so on according to your need. You can see that I have actually downloaded 3 different types of API over here, but you can always choose to only download one of the newest one, and it will always be backward compatible. So we can try to create the project, but most of this you might not need to change them until you get to a more advanced stage. For example, this one will actually be the launcher icon of your application. If you don't want this default icon, you can always change the image later on, then you will get different icons. We'll start our project by dealing with a very simple situation, an empty activity. Okay, so this will be a simple starting point. We'll start up with this and we'll try to create this empty activity first. So this empty activity is by default known as main activity. Of course, for development, you may actually name all of the activities according to their functionalities and etc. So it's easier for you to actually look at the different activities and what they are supposed to do. So here we'll try to use some generic names. Okay. So we'll try to wait for a short moment while they are actually creating the project. And then here you go. So this will be our first project, a practical one. You see they actually tried to create as a main activity.java. It's a Java file. And there's also an activity main.xml. So we'll try to work on this too. Okay. First, we need to try to run the application. We can try to run the application by going to run as and run as Android application. So when we are trying to run this application, it will try to launch the application. It can be launched onto emulators and also actual devices for testing, but because we have not created any right now, so they'll tell us no compatible target were found. Do you wish to add a new Android virtual device? So yes. So most of the time you will see that you can actually try to use virtual devices, which we call emulators. So we can try to go to launching a new virtual devices by going to the manager to actually create a new device. You can create a new device of your choice. Let's call this my phone. And you can select a device of your choice. So let's try to select something say like around 3.7. Let's try to use at least a KitKat. Right. So this is basically a virtual phone. You can create a phone and you can start and it will start to run. So most of the mobile applications today are actually tested using these virtual devices. But of course, these virtual devices are not very fast and efficient most of the time. That's why if you have actual devices, we will still actually encourage you to use actual devices. When you're developing using iOS, the concept is the same as well. But the differences is in iOS, if you want to test it on an actual device, you need to purchase the developer's license. So you cannot actually just try on for free. But Android do allow you to test on your own devices for free. Okay, of course, because Android is open source. You will see that it will take some time to actually start up the device. It feels pretty much like your actual phone, where you need to actually start it up and then you will get an interface that resembles an actual phone. So of course you will see most of the controls are a little bit more generic and etc. And you can actually try to use this to test your applications like an actual device. Here you can see these are some of the basic controls that are available in Android devices, including volume control, on off, and home button, the back button. Of course, some of these buttons are now obsolete, including the menu button and also a search button. And this is extremely rare, which is directional buttons. So these allows you to control the virtual device later on when we are actually having the actual situations running. So right now it is still loading. As you can tell, it will take some time to load. I have actually purposely tried to use a slightly older API. As you can tell, KitKat is not the newest API. It is quite not exactly obsolete yet, but it's pretty old right now. So of course, the older the APIs, the simpler it is and the faster it will load. For example, if we try something as old as a Froyo right now, it will load in a lot more faster manner. That is why I strongly recommend that if you have an actual device, you can consider using an actual device to actually work on your testing and development. So here we are still waiting for the device to actually load out. It will still take some time. Okay, depending on your computer performance and also depending on how much resources is required for that particular version and the combination of virtual device that you are creating. So here you can see it takes us quite a few minutes to actually get things started, and when it started it looks pretty much like an actual device. Here you can actually use it as an actual device where you can actually get into the applications. It is a little bit slow over here. It's not so responsive. Okay. That is why I tell you, if you actually have an actual device, it's best to use the actual device. Here there will be some applications that you can see, and these are pretty much some basic applications that you get to see in your devices. So, for example, you can try on calculator. And you can actually try to press the buttons like using a touchscreen, but you're controlling it using your mouse. You can tell that the actions that you take will have a delayed reaction. So this is because of the performance of the virtual device. So it is a little bit laggy most of the time when you actually try something over here. You can use the back button to go back, which you have to wait for a short while. And you can also click on menu buttons to go. You can click on the home button to go back to home, and etc. So previously we are starting this, and then to run our applications we can go back to select running our application, and then we can say OK. It will start to run the application. So it will try to launch this project into our emulator. Okay, close this as well. So it will actually try to launch this here and show us the project. Here they ask us whether to monitor the logcat. I would say yes, because the logcat will be very helpful for us to trace errors later on. And this is how our application looks like. By default, our empty activity is going to show us a hello world message. This is the default design. As you can tell, you can see from here. So this is basically the design of the hello world right now in this Android main.xml. Okay, this is where we design it, and this is what that is being shown right now. Okay, so basically, if you have an actual device, you are strongly advised to use the actual device. But how do you use that? You just go to the settings. You can try to look for your options under developer options. Of course, the developer options is not a default for most devices, commercial devices that you have nowadays. So you can actually try to go to the Android version and you click on it multiple times until it recognizes you as a developer. Then you will be able to get the developer's option. So you just go to About Phone and try to click on the version. You will get the developer options unlocked. So under developer options, we can actually try to look for this, the USB debugging mode. You can click on the USB debugging mode. They will give you a warning, etc. So they are giving you this warning because you are now allowing your computer to send files into your device. So it will give you this warning every time. You are not allowed to just click remember me and ignore the warning. You're supposed to click on this before plugging in the USB into your computer. For the first time when you do this, they should actually try to locate the drivers, and they will actually download all these drivers that is needed. One of the most important driver that they need is the ADB, the Android Debug Bridge, that allows the communication between your computer and your device. Most of the models that you purchase is likely going to have no issues and problems. If it turns out that they do not automatically get that done for you, you may try to Google and see how to get it done for particular models. Okay, so if you're using most of the Android devices that are using generic Android, not something that's custom made and etc., usually they should not pose any problems to you. Okay, so once you use this, then you can actually use your actual device as a testing tool as well. You do not need this virtual device over here. You can just plug in your actual device and all the test results will be sent to your phone. Okay. So let's try to have a look on how we actually get this done. Actually, the empty activity is not that empty. They had already given you some basic codes here. That is why you see a hello world. The activity itself is here and it has an onCreate method. The activity have a life cycle that you can control. So you have the different stages, the 7 stages that you can actually have a method overrided to tell us what to do during these stages, including on create, on start, on stop, on pause, and etc. So on create is being called when the activity is first called, and they will actually call an on create and start to do something here. Currently, we are only running this line of code where we are using set content view. Set content view allows us to update what is to be shown on the interface. So we are going to show r.layout.activity_main. The R over here refers to the resources res folder that we see over here, and you get to see a layout and the activity main.xml, which is this file. This is why we see this on the screen just now, because it is displaying this on the screen. And this is an XML file. It is actually an XML file. So you actually define this thing in XML. But of course, it gives you a preview in terms of how it looks like, and it also allows you to have an easy way to actually manipulate your UI by using simple drag and drop. So it's actually quite useful, and we'll actually try some simple examples very soon. Okay. Here in the XML, you can see that we are using a relative layout, and inside this relative layout, there's a text view. So this layout is for us to show different components within the layout, and the component that we show here is a text view. It's an object that allows us to view show text. So the text that we are showing over here is alias string hello world. This is actually a reference point to our resources, values, strings. So this is the string that we are showing right now, hello world. It is highly recommended that you try to use all these reference points for all these strings that you use in your whole application. So it's easier for you to manage all the strings, and you can also reuse the strings easily for multiple activities and etc. So when you want to update it, you can update every instances that you have in the whole application. So we do highly recommend you to try to actually manage all the strings together, so that it's easier for you to actually try to do some of this editing, updating, and managing the strings later on. Right? So here you can see that we have different layout over here. We can easily create new layouts by going to new and create new layouts. We can create new XML layout files, then they can show us what we can do over here, and we can call this activity tests. We can select the first linear layout, then it will actually create us such a situation. So this is activity test. It's currently empty right now. There's only a linear layout that's being created right now. Okay, so this is our activity test, which we'll actually try to play around with. In the layout part, the basic layouts that you can try to use, including the linear layouts and relative layouts. So these are the two very basic categories of layouts that you can try to use. So the linear layout comes with two directions, a vertical one and a horizontal one. You can see the small icons here will roughly represent how the layout looks like. So these are the boxes that tells you how each of the contents were related to one another. In the previous example, you see that we use a relative layout. A relative layout is generally free for you to actually control where to place a different object. For example, if I drag a text wheel in, you can see the line showing you the relationship of this object to the previous hello world object. And if I drag another object in, it will also show me a relationship of this object with other objects. I have strong freedom of to position this thing all over my UI depending on where I like, whenever I like, and it will actually be placed according to certain rules in terms of how far it is from the other object. So it will be based on a certain object. If I move the object that it was based on, it will also change the position of it. So this is a relative layout. For a linear layout, it is a lot more simpler. For a linear layout, I can drag something in and drop it anywhere. It always comes back here in the first position. And I can drag something in, drop anywhere, it comes back here. So it only allows us to drop it in the next position. So relatively less control compared to a relative layout. Of course, as you can tell, there are more layout types that you can select, including grid layouts, table layouts, that allows you to actually control different kind of situation, especially table situation and grid situations. So here let's try to show you how to actually create this simple situation. We can update the text directly from the properties that you see here, or you can also update it from the XML, depending on whether you prefer to actually do it in a graphical manner, or you would rather prefer to just deal with all the codes. So totally up to your preference. When you're trying to actually put in the text, you would see that they will give you a warning that you're not using the alias string resources. They will not stop you from using an actual text. If you really wanted to do that, they do allow you to do that. But they will actually highly recommend you to use the alias string resources. You can add new alias string resources in the strings.xml. You can also directly add them here via the interface. So I can go to the text of my text view and actually update this by creating a new string. So we'll try to create a new string. Perhaps we want to prompt the user for a name. Oh, sorry. So we call this prompt name and we ask the user for name. they will create a prompt name for us and we can directly use this prompt name. Then they will show us, please enter your name. But in the XML, it's actually using alias string prompt name. And you can see that the prompt name is now created. Okay. Here you can also create an ID for each of these elements that you drag in. By default, they call it TextView1, TextView2. You can give them more meaningful name, for example, TV prompt. You can choose particularly which one to give an ID. For example, this is an edit text with a name. You can also say that I do not want to give an ID to this text view. The IDs are particularly important when you are doing programming later on, when you need to refer to these elements. For example, when you're using an edit text, the edit text allows you to actually input text inputs. So it's actually a text view, a text box. So it allows you to input something, and I bet you wanted to actually know what is being inputted by the users. So you may need to have an ID to refer back to this element later on. Okay. And then now I'd like to show you the usage of multiple layouts. We can actually try to drag in a different layout and place them in our layouts. You can't see any difference here yet because we have not placed anything here. But you can notice that I put another linear layout in. But this linear layout should not be a same direction. It should be a different direction. If you place something with the same direction in another layout, it has no meaning. It will not make any differences. So I must try different combinations to properly use different layouts. The embedded layouts allow me to create more interesting ways. For example, here right now in this linear layout, I can drag another vertical linear layout into the horizontal linear layout. So what am I going to try to do here is I'm going to actually try to drag a text view. Okay. And I'm going to try to drag a few checkboxes in. Okay. So I try to drag one checkbox in first. We'll try to deal with it later on. So here for the strings, you can actually try to give it a name. Let's try to call it color. Okay, we give a very short caption here, select colors. So we can try to create some colors here. Let's try to create red. Okay. Okay. So of course you can drag the different components in and try to change each of its text as you drag them in. But actually you actually have more choices in terms of how you can manipulate them easily. If you look at the properties, you have a lot of things that you can actually update here. This includes the margin, for example the padding. You can try to select the style, the gravity, and etc. You actually have a lot of things to select here, including background color, foreground color, and etc. So once you have selected this, you may drag another object and select the different styles again. But if you know that they are roughly of the same style, it's possible for you to directly duplicate the objects. So for those who are actually more comfortable dealing with the XML, you probably would come to the XML and duplicate the objects. Okay, let's not duplicate it first. Let's try to name the ID according to a certain style first before we try to duplicate it. So we may have three different colors: red, green, blue. And we might want to update the strings as well so that they do not reflect the same thing. But of course, color green and color blue will not be automatically created. We can always go to the strings part and start to create these colors. Again, you have multiple choice how you want to create it. You have a graphical interface that allows you to create the colors easily, and you might also duplicate an existing pattern and update them accordingly. Okay, so I've created these different colors over here, then I can display these different colors. Alright, so what's next is I try to actually go back to my layouts, and I'm going to drag another vertical layout and place it beside this one. I still do not see anything special here. I still feel that I'm just placing something next to one another until I drag another text to be placed inside here in this different linear layout. I may actually drag this a little bit over there to create some space so that they don't stick together. And then I can drag some other things here, including, for example, a radial group. So a radial group is a group of buttons. Sorry. So a radial group is a group of radial buttons. It's different comparing to using one radial button, as this will all be combined into a certain group of radial buttons. So here in this radial group, I managed to actually place these things side by side right now by actually having a horizontal linear layout, and the horizontal linear layout allowing certain things to be placed vertically between the different columns inside my horizontal linear layouts. So I managed to actually have a simple manipulation to allow things to appear side by side, even using simple layouts like a linear layout. So a lot of these UIs were not actually created using very complicated manner, and you do not have to always rely on relative layout to make sure that you can place everything in place. It is in fact a lot harder to use relative layout completely. So you get to see that in a lot of times combinations of different type of layouts of different nature is extremely common. We can drag a button in and place the button here, and this is basically a very simple layout that we have created. So let's give this button a name. We call it BT submit. Okay. So we can try to run this right now by actually going to main activity and change our display to this current XML instead. So previously we are showing activity underscore main. Now we wanted to show our new activity underscore test. We can run our application and we can wait for it to be sent to our emulator so that we can actually see our end results. As you can tell from the first test, when we try to run this application, it will be automatically launched and run in our emulators. So when we try to test these projects, they actually send the installer, the APK, to our devices, including the virtual devices, install it, and launch it. So as you can tell, I am already launching this, and right now I actually get to control my interface. I can type in something, I can actually select the different things here, and I can also select the radio buttons, and I also can click on my button. But of course, here I had not actually designed any methods to deal with whatever I'm doing over here. So the next thing that we can actually try to do is we want to actually react to this button click and do something. So how can we actually react to these button clicks? Okay. So here, in the Java code, we have various ways to actually react to these button clicks. And first thing that we need to do is to ensure that the button is actually being referred to in our actual application over here and in the main Java code. You can see that every item over here were actually represented using a specific tag in the XML to represent how the UI looks like. These tag names that you see are the actual class name, the actual Java class names for these objects. So if you want to refer to these objects, you can actually always know what classes they were and refer to them directly. So the classes that I'm using over here is a button. I create a button, therefore I can actually try to get this button from my actual XML that I've created there earlier on. Let's call this BT1. And how do I actually get that button? Is by calling find view by ID. And then I can actually try to find the ID by going to resources, looking for the ID, and try to look at what are the IDs that are available. So previously I've already created an ID for my button, which is called BT submit. So this would actually be the ID. This is why I tell you earlier on, the IDs are very important if you wanted to refer to them. For items that were not given an ID will not be able to be referred to from the Java code programmatically. We can import the packages that's required for this button. Usually the first recommendations are usually accurate, but we do advise you to look at it carefully. You might not really get the actual correct situation sometimes, so you have to be careful. So here we can try to set an on-click listener and we can import it from the android.view on-click listener, and we can actually try to implement the method that's required, which is an on-click method. So in the on-click method, we can define what happens when this button is being clicked on. So we can use a toast to actually show some results here. So this toast over here allows us to define a text message and a duration. You can show the toast once you have created the toast. So whenever we click on this button, it will actually toast a message. This message is actually toasted as a temporary message. Whenever we click on the button, it should show you a text. This is a test, and we use a longer length toast. You can choose between a long and short toast. And this toast is quite popularly seen in a lot of applications as a temporary message being shown to you at the bottom of the screen, and only for temporary purpose, and you're not allowed to really interact with it. It will expire by itself and will disappear. So we use these messages to actually show us notifications, and also programmers tend to use it to show certain messages, error messages, and etc. to help them debug. Okay, so we may want it to show these results in a different activity. Every activity allows us to display a unique UI. So if I want to actually display a different UI, I'm supposed to create a different activity. We can create different activities by creating new activities. So we can go to Android and look for new activity. I'm creating another empty activity, and I'm calling this next activity. When I create a new activity, you tend to see that they will create us another XML that is corresponding to this activity, and another Java code that's corresponding to this activity as well. You will notice that all of these were Java classes, but you should not create activities as Java classes because activities are registered differently. You can look at the Androidmanifest Xml over here. It defines the details of your application, including what are the activities that you have created, what are the permissions that you are granted with, and etc. So we get to permissions later on when we actually deal with other actions that require permission. So you can see that I can actually create different activities and define these activities over here, and their properties are defined here. So if you create this as a Java class, it will not automatically be recognized here, and you might need to manually type it in or manually insert this information in. Okay. So we want to showcase that we can go to the different activity that we have created. We can make use of intents. Intents allowed us to actually call different activities and activate different activities, call different background services, and etc. So it's a very useful tool. For the intent, we can actually try to state where is the current location. So we are in the main activity right now, and we wanted to go to this next activity that we have created. So we will put .class to indicate that's the class that we want to go to, and you can use start activity calling the intent to actually activate the activity. So intent is under Android.content. We can import it. Okay, we can test out the situation over here by running the application again. You will see that every time when I send a new copy over, they will try to install the new version, and they will actually try to close the existing running application first, install a newer version, and then they will actually try to show me the newer version then. So I can actually try to select different things over here and click on the button. So it will actually bring me to the next activity. By default, I can go back to my previous activity by using back. Then they will actually bring me back to the previous activity. If I click on the back again, and that's already the first activity, by default, it will actually close the application. Okay, of course, you can override all of these default situations later on if you don't want it to behave as such. So another thing that we can actually try to do over here, and we can try to see over here, is we can actually try to pass values from this activity to another activity by using our intents. We can use put extra to help us pass a different parameter to the other side, and we can pass different type of values including strings, boolean, integers, and etc. So let's try to test by giving it a name to identify the value. So we call this a value. So imagine we want to pass a value called practical1 over, which is a string, and we call it value. We can actually try to retrieve this value from the target next activity. Okay. So here, we can try to actually get whatever we pass through via the intent by getting the current intent and also the extra values. But we have to define what is the data type that we are actually getting back and what is the identifier for that extra value that we can actually get back. So this is the extra value that we managed to get. we may want to display this extra value out. So we want to control this text view. The text view that we have over here right now is having a default name. Oh, actually, it doesn't have any name yet, so we will give it a name. Let's call it text view has. Save it, and then we can find this by its ID. Text view test. So only those that we have actually defined in the XML will be recognized. We want to get control of these items over here by using find view by ID, because we wanted to actually try to update the value into extra. So suppose we will see practical 1 over there. You can of course add some other terms here to prove it. And we can sort of show something like that. Can run the application again. Sorry, I got an extra S over here. And I accidentally removed a closing bracket. Now I can actually try to click on the button. It will toast a message. It will go to the next activity and show practical 1 being the value that passed over from the first activity to the second activity. So you can try out to see if you can actually try to grab these values from the input that the users actually type in and actually send them over instead. So you can always do this by actually trying to control all these different elements that you actually created in your layouts. So you must ensure that those elements that you want to get their input, you want to change their properties and etc., you do give them an ID, and the ID has to be unique. So you can use find view by ID to actually grab these unique IDs and assign them back into their corresponding objects later on, and you can control them accordingly. Then you can try to look at each of these elements that you have already created and see what are the properties that you can actually set. So this differs according to the nature of the different type of objects that you're using. For example, a button allows you to have a set on click listener. Of course, the button also allows you to have set text. Then you have a lot of these options that you can actually select. Okay. So these were some simple examples that we want to show you today in terms of how to create a very simple UI. Hopefully you're having some fun to learn about some simple things. And of course, to create a more comprehensive UI, you may need to spend a little bit more time in terms of trying to select different colors, different styles, and etc. to actually get the job done. You can read the lecture slides to see more hints and details about how to actually create a simple UI. In short, we can tell you everyone can try to create a simple UI by trying to make sure that their UI is simple enough for a user to use in a mobile perspective. As you can see, the device screen is very small compared to a desktop display. So we try to fit in less things into a screen so that everything is obvious and easy for us to use and touch. Since our devices are touchscreen based, you can see that we will not try to create very small buttons or very small areas for us to touch. So some of the buttons are reasonably large for us to click on and to modify and etc. So the next thing that we will have to worry about is the color usage. We tend to see a lot of colors that are actually quite badly selected for some young programmers. Actually, the selection wasn't that much of a challenge. You just have to make sure that contrast is being strongly enhanced in the color selection. For example, if I have a very light background color, I will use a dark foreground color for my text. So try to avoid colors that are pretty much in the middle, that are not so much of a dark color and not so much of a bright color. These colors will be quite challenging to be used in a UI designs, and it's very hard for you to actually achieve some reasonable good results. Please remember that the UI can always be viewed under some challenging situations like outdoors and etc. So selecting a bad color can sometimes give you a very bad user experience. So we hope that you enjoyed the class for today, and we will actually bring to you more basic functionalities in the next chapters for you to design some simple UI.